Hi everybody, TJ Mack from Vintage Cards and Nostalgia here. And in today's video, I want to talk about the power that our card and memorabilia displays have. Now, in the summer of 1989, I was 14 years old and going into 10th grade. I grew up in Niagara Falls, New York, in an urban neighborhood known as LaSalle. And it wasn't too far from the infamous Love Canal, which I was alive during that time. And my neighborhood that I grew up in was a heavy mix of Polish, German, and Italian descendants, and my family was Scotch-Irish. Now, I had a friend, and his name was Jim, and he lived a few blocks from me. And that summer in 1989, I would ride my bike over to his house, and we would hang out and play basketball in his backyard. And then sometimes we'd go in the street right in front of his house and throw the baseball back and forth. Now, he was a big Red Sox fan, and his favorite player was Roger Clemens. And if you watch my channel, you know that I'm a Yankees fan, and my favorite player was Don Mattingly, but I was also a huge Mark McGwire fan. Now, Jim and I would throw the ball back and forth, talking about baseball and girls, and whatever else would cross our mind. Well, one day we were playing catch, and we noticed an elderly gentleman sitting on a small concrete porch. He had a head full of white hair that was neatly parted to the side. He was wearing a white and green golf shirt with khaki pants and sneakers, basically the typical wardrobe of a man in his late 70s. Now he's thumbing through a photo album, and he was occasionally glancing over in our direction. And after about 10 or so minutes, he gestured for the two of us to come over. So we dropped our gloves and we walked over to see what he wanted. He asked us to come up the steps and stand next to him on each side. Now, there wasn't a lot of room, but we squeezed in. He said, "I can see you guys like to play ball. Let me show you some of the ball players that my dad followed when I was growing up." And then in this photo album, what he had in there were a bunch of T206 cards that were inserted into the pages. And it was those type of albums that would like peel over, and then you would stick the photos inside and then seal it back down again. And when I saw these cards, I knew very little about them, even though I collected cards. I didn't collect cards that old, and I didn't know too much about the players. Of course, I knew about Ty Cobb and Cy Young, especially being there was a Cy Young award in baseball, and they were very famous. And he had cards of both of them in the book, but I don't remember which one they were. I know there's different iterations of the cards in the set, but I remember distinctly at least one of each of those players. And it was the first time that I ever heard of the famed Tinker to Evers to Chance, and he briefly told us about them, and I thought that was really cool. And then he was thumbing through page after page, showing us card after card and telling us about some of the players in the book. And he told us that his dad, when he was growing up, had a workshop. And in their basement, they had the cards. His dad would put the cards on the toolbox. He would glue them onto the toolbox, and then he would also display them throughout the work area. And when his dad passed away, he removed the cards off the toolbox and the walls, and then he placed them into this photo album. Now, even though I was only 14 years old and didn't fully appreciate what I was seeing, I understood that these cards meant a lot to him, and he was proud to share them with us. Now, it's funny, I've been wanting to share this story for a long time on my channel, but I was looking for the right way to do it. Now, I don't collect T206 cards, I just don't feel the connection with them, but instead I thought it would be very cool to show these 1960 Fleer cards from the set that my oldest son and I collect. And I've showed some various cards from the set in other videos, but I wanted to put these four together, particularly for this one, because it really illustrates what occurred that day. You can see here on these 1960 Fleer cards that they look like the ends of a scrapbook, and the cards are being inserted inside. And when I see these cards, it reminds me of that day with that photo album and that older gentleman sharing those cards with us. Just a really moving day that now, as I look back, it really did have an effect on me. As I said, there is a power to our card and memorabilia displays. When I walk into my card room, I instantly become immersed in nostalgia. It gives me a sense of continuity that my past, present, and future are all interconnected. It's a reminder to me of how my personal history and experience have shaped the person that I am. For example, when I look at this 1966 Topps Harmon Killebrew, it takes me right back to that summer of 1989 when I would head over to my local card shop with Jim and my other friends, and I specifically remember buying a 1966 Topps Killebrew and paying about $9 for it. I would take my paper route money and buy packs of cards, but would also pick up some singles to include a vintage player or two. Vintage for me back then was any card before 1977. Now, as I go through my collection, I'm often reconnected to some of the cards I owned as a kid. It may sound silly, but that brings me a lot of comfort. Now, in past videos, I have talked about the cards that have deep meaning to me, and that is important. But one of the things that I've become to realize is that the displays I put in my card room are seen by my kids, and that will be part of their memories. As I've shown in a few of my videos, my card room also acts as a space where my kids play video games and watch movies. And they're in there frequently, and while they typically are not walking around and intently staring at the displays, they're surrounded by them, and either consciously or unconsciously, they're taking in what is being displayed. Now, just like a favorite childhood Christmas ornament or decoration, the cards may someday trigger for them a flood of memories and emotions, reminding them of their time spent in the room with family and friends. See, the cards are synonymous with this room, and I've become more and more conscious of that as a collector. In a way, it takes my collecting from an individual experience to a collective one. And what I mean by that is, just like that elderly man that showed Jim and I the book of T206 cards, I want to keep the cards that I collect and display because they belong to me. I sold much of my childhood collection to help start my adult collection. While I don't regret that, I don't want to sell cards that I display from my current collection because they're a part of me. And I want them to know that when they see this 1976 Topps Rod Carew, that was the original one that Dad displayed when they were growing up. That's why I don't upgrade my cards, because I just love the original ones that I had, and that's why I buy the best ones that I can buy at the time I get them. And even though maybe my tastes have changed a little bit, these are still my cards, and they mean a lot to me. And the cards, to me, were part of my journey as a collector, and they reflect who I am. Now, my kids are also part of my journey, and my collection in some ways reflects them. Like when I display or acquire these Bowman cards, my son Michael always looks at them. He just loves them. He's drawn to the small cards and the artwork. And my son Joe is getting more into football, and I can see him taking more and more of a liking to my football collection. Now my daughter, Catherine, is getting into my grandfather's or her grandfather's magazines and the cards of the players that connect to him. My daughter Rachel is very sentimental in general, and I can see her wanting to have something that maybe she remembers seeing as a kid. She may not know what that is now, but you never know when an image will conjure up a nostalgic memory. Now, when I share my thoughts, they're not meant to preach to you how to collect, but rather I'm giving you insight into how my mind works. Maybe a different perspective that you haven't thought about, or maybe you have and agree or disagree with it. Either way, I enjoy it when collectors share how they view the hobby and their collections. So as always, I appreciate your time stopping in to watch my videos. Hopefully you enjoyed the cards, the insights, and the magazines, and I hope you have a great weekend.